Some of the oldest homes in America can be found here in St. Augustine, a city founded by the Spanish in 1565. On today's episode, we're taking a closer look at one of those houses that has a very unique story to tell. It's a story of enterprising women, early Florida tourism, and the people of color who were the backbone of making this house function. Coming up, I'm taking you inside the Ximenez-Fatio House Museum with a couple of guides working to preserve its heritage. The gallivanting starts now. The historic Ximenez-Fatio House Museum is one of the best preserved and most authentic Second Spanish period residential buildings in St. Augustine. It was built in 1798 by Spanish merchant Don Andre Ximenez for his wife Juana and their children. The house has witnessed many changes and events over the centuries, from the British occupation to the Civil War to the Flagler era. It has also been home to several generations of enterprising women who ran it as a boarding house for travelers and tourists. Today, the house is owned and operated by the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America, a group that has restored and furnished the house with period antiques and artifacts. When you visit the Ximenez-Fatio House, you will learn about the lives and stories of the people who lived and worked in the house, from the Ximenez family to the boarding house visitors to the enslaved servants. You will also see how the house has changed over time, reflecting the different architectural styles and cultural influences of each era.
So this is the first room that you'll see if you take a tour of our museum. We really highlight the archaeological finds that we've had here throughout our 70 or so years as a museum. We're one of the most well archaeologically excavated sites here in St. Augustine. We've had over 15 different digs on the property. We interpret that and use it to recreate the boarding house that you see here today. But some of the things we find date all the way back to Native American groups that were here before European contact. And we have modern things ranging all the way up to the 1930s that we find. So we are currently standing in the recreation of Andre Ximenez's general store. Here he would be selling pretty much anything you may need, ranging from salt, pepper, seasoning, alcohol, tobacco, nails, gunpowder. We know from our historic records that the biggest seller out of this store would have been our alcohol. The reason for that was the billiards hall located directly to the right of us. You could purchase a bottle of wine, carry it to the room next door, have someone open it, serve it, shoot pool with your friends, carry on for the afternoon. But this store was pretty profitable, so once the Ximenez family left the house at the end of the Second Spanish period, the ladies who turned this into a boarding house actually kept the general store running.
We have this pig wineskin, so this once was a real pig. Once it passed away, I guess you could say, they would clean it out and then they would put an extra layer on the inside, so it wasn't too gross in there. But it was said that they would store alcohol in this, and it was kind of a celebratory piece. If we were having a celebration, you would definitely be served from the pig. Welcome into our dining room. Included with your price of staying at the boarding house, which was about $20 per week per person. Take into account at the time the normal salary was only $10, so we were known as a more upscale boarding house. But included with the price of staying here were 3 meals a day, all served in this area of the home. The largest meal actually came around 1:30, and it was a full 9-course meal every single day. So basically the equivalent of Thanksgiving on a daily basis. And when you see the size of our kitchen, it is amazing they were able to create that amount of food every single day, all served in here.
Andre Ximenez was 34 at the time that he married Juana Pellicer, who was actually 15. Juana is a very interesting individual here in St. Augustine history. She was the daughter of Francisco Pellicer, who was one of the leaders of the Menorcans, Him and two others were actually the ones who fled the plantation in the middle of the night to come flee for their freedom. We have a mix of Menorcan and Spanish heritage that form the foundation of our household here.
You're currently standing in our guest parlor, which was an area where our guests typically after mealtime would maybe get to know one another, partake in some gambling, definitely a little bit more of a masculine area of the home, I've been told, but women and children were allowed in here if they really wanted. We have a game called Lou, which was very popular at the time. It's very similar to poker, so each one of these mother of pearl pieces had a monetary value. Unfortunately, the exact rules have slightly been lost to time, but people do still fill in the blanks, and it can be played today. But this is definitely an area where sure many of our guests would have spent a good amount of time.
The coquina behind the lime wash here is actually pushing the lime off. That's totally natural. That's what coquina does. Because it's excavated from the ground, it's a living, breathing thing. Water comes in and water comes out. We learned the hard way in the 1970s trying to preserve this coquina. We actually added a latex paint over top of it, which closed in those pores, preventing it from breathing. What that did was had a mold buildup inside the coquina, and it actually started destroying our walls. Fortunately, we realized the error of our ways and pulled all that latex paint off about 10 years later. Since then, we've been trying to recover our coquina and get it back to its original form. And the way to do that is the same way they did it back in the colonial days, which is adding coats of lime wash to it. Every 7 years, you add more, and it'll just continually push off those layers. You add more to it, and it keeps your coquina fresh and preserved underneath it, so future generations can come and enjoy our house. So this room here is modeled after what a room would look like if an officer was staying here in our boarding house. The ladies who ran our house would offer up free room and board to an officer. It was seen as sort of hiring protection. While we were a boarding house, it was the peak of the Seminole Wars, so you never really knew what was going to happen. But having trained professionals staying in your boarding house was sort of a way to protect yourselves.
Given our location, right by the water, we would have had a good amount of ship captains staying with us. Of course, mosquito netting, as we touched on, many diseases at the time were coming from mosquitoes, so just a way to keep our guests safe as they slept here. And then, of course, everybody's favorite under each and every bed is the chamber pot. Of course, that was the only option at the time, but luckily, being an upscale boarding house, we would have someone clear that out regularly.
So while we don't have any original furniture, of course we have our original structure here. Now, one of the main components of the original structure is our staircase that you see here. These are all original steps to our boarding house, except the bottom one here. We had to replace this one after a hurricane in 2005, I believe. But as we walk up these steps, you'll notice you don't hear any creaking or cracking. Considering a 223-year-old staircase, that's pretty impressive. The main reason for that is the wood they built the stairs out of is called heart pine. It's an incredibly dense wood. It's actually the marrow of a pine tree. It takes approximately 30 years to grow a single inch of it, but it's incredibly durable stuff, and the biggest benefit to using it is termites refuse to eat it. We use coquina to make all of our walls, naturally mined right over there on Anastasia Island. You dig up these large large chunks of fossilized beach essentially, lay them out in the sun for about 5 years. While that's out in the sun, the water evaporates out of it, leaving behind this shell, porous-like material. You then carve your bricks, then use it to build your walls. And if you know our fort, then you're familiar with coquina. It's an incredibly strong material, and yeah, it's one of the main reasons St. Augustine is still here today is that.
So this section of the house was completely off limits to the guests. It was really just an area for the particular owner at the time. This was done by a man named Daniel Whitehurst, who was the son of our property manager, Eliza Whitehurst, who lived in the room right next door. So we've all kind of made our guesses as to why he did this. We really are not too sure, but for us it's such an amazing piece of history to be able to look at every single day, and just let alone know that this window has survived all that time. The last owner of the boarding house, Miss Ximenez-Fatio, is pictured right here.
With the fortune that she received from her father's plantation, she was eventually able to buy the boarding house that we are in here today. She is one of the main reasons for our high-end reputation. Louisa worked here all the way until the 1870s. Following her death was right around the time Henry Flagler started building his resorts, which was the official end to the boarding house period here in St. Augustine.
We also do paranormal investigations on our property. Of course, being over 222 years old, we have had a few deaths here. I think we have 15 documented. Most of them were caused by yellow fever, tuberculosis, things like that. But this is a section of the house that we do a lot of our paranormal investigation, and we have had a lot of activity in this room. Luckily, I'm someone that isn't too scared to be in the house at night, but this is the one room when I'm here alone and I'm closing up, I make sure I'm not making eye contact with the dolls. I just get out of here, lock it up, and move on.
This room in particular is modeled after, or what I've been told is a frail lady's room. It'd be an elderly single woman who'd come to stay at the boarding house based on doctors' recommendations. Not to get dark, but this would be their final destination on their trip. Many of the people staying here knew they would not be returning up north. Because we had a large timber industry here in Florida, getting fresh wood to build a coffin was also difficult at times. It was expensive. So a lot of the people traveling from up north ended up bringing timber with them to construct their own coffins.
So welcome to our third floor at the museum. This was the main area where any enslaved people living here would have slept. At any given point, we really are not sure how many enslaved people would have been on property, because many of our guests would have come with their own enslaved people, but it would have been an area where we would store luggage that guests came with, as well as additional pieces of furniture. But right down here, you'll see our mattresses, which were filled with Spanish moss, and those would have just been pulled out every single night. You would find a place to sleep. And of course, as I'm sure you could tell, as soon as we walked up the steps, it did get a lot warmer up here. So definitely not the best conditions, although this probably was a little bit better than the other area the enslaved people working in the kitchen would have slept in. That is right above our kitchen, which had a beehive oven kept on 24 hours a day, basically 7 days a week. So you're going to sleep right on top of that oven. Definitely not the best situation.
This is my personal favorite area of the entire property here. We try and grow everything based on historical documents that we have here from our archaeological digs. So for the most part, what you see here behind me are based on things that we know were grown here during the time period that we were a boarding house. We pretty much use everything we grow. Whatever we don't eat, we try and give out to our neighbors. If you visit in July, you'll see our fig tree here, which is estimated to be around 150 years old. July is when our fig tree fruits, so the entire month we have fresh figs coming in. I actually climb up there and pick them, and we save them to make jam out of them.
This is actually the only freestanding coquina kitchen left in St. Augustine, and it is one of 3 properties with a remaining beehive oven, which is what you're going to see right over there. This is without a doubt one of the most important areas, or was, for our boarding house. We also have a few objects for babies, a crib and things like that in here, because many of our enslaved people who would work in this section of the house would have children here. So on top of, making all of those meals, take into account there were babies crying, obviously a very hot and stressful area, but very important to the boarding house. It was built obviously away from the rest of the house because most fires would break out in a kitchen. And yeah, we are the only one that is still remaining to this day.
The Ximenez-Fatio House Museum is not only a historic house museum, but also a living history museum. Throughout the year, the museum plays host to various events and programs that bring history to life. You can check the museum's website or Facebook page for more information about their upcoming events and activities. Here are some tips that first-time visitors should know before visiting the Ximenez-Fatio House Museum. The parking lot at the museum is very small, with limited parking available on a first-come basis for the duration of your museum visit. The museum is open for tours Monday to Saturday, 10 a.m. until 3:45 p.m. Docent-led guided tours are available at 11 a.m., 1 p.m., and 3 p.m., weather permitting. Admission for adults is $15 for guided tours, $12 for audio tours. Seniors, students, teachers, first responders, and military personnel get in for $10. Children between 7 and 12 pay $6. Flagler College students and St. Johns County residents pay $5 with a valid ID. Self-guided audio tours are available at any time until 3:45 p.m. The Fig Tree gift shop remains open until 5 p.m. The museum is wheelchair accessible on the first floor only. There are stairs to access the second and third floors. Visiting the Ximenez-Fatio House Museum is a great way to experience St. Augustine's rich history and culture. You'll be transported back in time as you explore this historic landmark, which has been preserved and restored with care and passion. You'll also learn about the fascinating stories of the people who made this house their home and business for over 2 centuries. Whether you're a history buff or a curious traveler, you'll find something to enjoy and appreciate at this museum. Don't miss this opportunity to discover one of St. Augustine's hidden gems. Outside the Ximenez-Fatio House in the nation's oldest city, hope to see you out there gallivanting soon. See you next time.